Um, Hi. So I realised starting a presentation calling for death is quite morbid. Perhaps I didn't get enough play as a child. But I wanted to reassure you that it actually comes from a place of big passion. So in a nod to kind of my time in the US, I love mobile. It's where I grew up. I've been in it for about 10 years. And honestly, I think it's probably one of still the most exciting devices out there. And for me personally, the reason that I love it so much is because I think it brings technology closer to us than any other device still. And I think it's the gateway to kind of what's to come. So we're already seeing Apple Watch and wearables kind of like hotting up the game, but they don't work without mobile phone. And I think that's because mobile is disseminating technology into our real world, and it's kind of the first taste of what's to come. So I love it. I'm really, really, really passionate about mobile as a device. So obviously I pay a lot of attention to what's coming around in terms of the question circuit and the press and kind of what gets talked about. And the thing that kind of gets talked about the most at the moment is what's our mobile strategy. And I don't really know how to express how much this winds me up, but honestly, I think this is going to join the Hall of Fame of stupid questions that we can ask about mobile. To give you an example of some of its predecessors over the last kind of 10 years, perhaps the first one for me was probably around 2008, when real conversations were had about, do we need a mobile optimized website? I dare you to say that in a boardroom today. I bet it wouldn't go down very well. Of course you need a mobile optimized website. That was then succeeded as apps grew and mobile became its own piece by another stupid question, which was, I want Nike Plus for my brand. If you've ever asked this, probably what you were really asking for was, I want 7 years of R&D and a successful mobile app that's perceived as being utterly innovative to the kind of world out there. Yeah, that's probably not what you were asking for. What you were asking for was, what is the right thing to do with mobile? So those are two bad questions, which in hindsight does look ridiculous, and I think that's where the question about what is our mobile strategy will kind of fall. That said, I can kind of understand why it's top of mind and why we're thinking about it. Mobile is dominating everything we are doing now, right? So it takes over email. It's ruling social. Mobile is social. It's Instagram, it's Snapchat, it's, I've forgotten all the other ones, Tinder, dating. It's everything that's social, right? It takes over Facebook and YouTube, etc. And it's becoming a screen that takes more of our time than TV. So it really is kind of front and center of kind of the digital age. But the problem with thinking about it device up and kind of thinking about what our mobile strategy is that it immediately starts limiting what you can do with mobile. So if I go, what's our mobile social strategy? If I go, what our mobile commerce strategy is, what's our mobile advertising strategy is, yeah, they're probably questions you need to think about, and you need to think about what you're doing from a mobile advertising point of view, but ultimately they're strategically the wrong questions you should be asking of mobile. And I kind of want to give you an example of kind of why this is so short-sighted. So a question that came into our New York office, kind of, or keeps on bounding around our New York office quite a lot, is how do I get relevant, personalized messages sent to our customers in our retail stores? So that doesn't actually come in. Really, that's code for, I think Beacon is really cool. It's getting a lot of press. We need a Beacon strategy. Awesome. Beacon is amazing, right? It does exactly that. It's going to allow you to have personalized, relevant messages straight to somebody's handset in your store or near to products in a store. But the problem with thinking like this and kind of thinking mobile up is actually there's kind of a whole surge of questions and kind of thinking that has to go before that. So we start with the device. We have to put a beacon somewhere. That has to be in a store, and it probably has to be linked to some kind of commerce. And the first challenge with that is if you don't have a brand that has a footprint, a physical footprint, you're already looking at kind of partnerships with suppliers and you're looking at your distribution channels, so that's not a quick job. The second piece of it is that you probably need a mobile app that's downloaded, that's regularly used, that has a really strong value proposition, and is compelling from a user experience point of view. So that's its kind of own beast, right? Do you have a good mobile app strategy? Do you have a mobile strategy that kind of works for your business? But to be really relevant and personalized, you need to connect with everything else that's going on with your brand and everything else that you understand with your consumer, right? You need the right permissions. You need to know everything that's happened in the last kind of few months in terms of search terms online, et cetera, et cetera. What are they doing with your brand? And connect that into the app to kind of connect to the beacon. These two things have to talk to one another through some kind of data warehouse, probably, to make sure that you're giving relevant, personalized messages. And you probably need some kind of weird proposition and permission as to why you should even be able to talk to somebody and not feel like you're spamming them within a store. So that simple question of, I want to do beacon, if you really want to do beacon at scale, you're looking at something which is infinitely more complicated and probably costs quite a lot of money. So that's kind of where I'm coming from with saying what is our mobile strategy, what's our beacon strategy. Asking kind of questions of mobile about what strategy is kind of really the wrong start point. So now I've purged and said why I don't like mobile strategy so much. Well, what do I think is the answer? And I think some of the guys have talked about experience design and kind of thinking design up earlier on, and that's kind of where we're going, really. So if you're not asking what our mobile strategy is, you should be asking, what do we need to do as a brand? And then how is mobile relevant for that, if mobile is relevant for that? So this is a map that we've used in the UK and in the US, and it's just to kind of start organizing, thinking about kind of what the business challenge or the business problem is, right? So we often get briefs that come in from a brand point of view, from a kind of an experience design point of view, or from a product point of view. And really at that point, you should be asking, what do we need to do for our business? Do we need to drive sales? Do we need to competitively block a competitor coming in aggressively through a digital space? Whatever your kind of business question is, that's ultimately the start point. We then tend to think about channels. So social, content, commerce, all of kind of the buzzwords about kind of what's going on. But typically this is how a marketing team would organize themselves around kind of what they deliver. So you'd have a social manager, or you'd have a content manager, or you'd have a commerce team. And lastly, devices. These are the things that are changing the most and kind of moving the most quickly. So it kind of makes sense to kind of put them at the bottom because they're not stable. They're not something that's going to be there in kind of 5 years' time and functioning in the same way that it does today. They're the things that are bringing the most interesting technology to the table, but making decisions about what to do with them ground up is ultimately pointless, right? We don't know how well Apple Watch is going to be doing in 3 years' time, what the adoption is going to look like, what the features are even going to look like. But we do know what we need to do from a business point of view to kind of be strategically sound. So I want to give you an example. I've given you so much theory and kind of thinking about what I think about mobile. And I'm going to give you one kind of deep case study, and this comes from Guinness. So as a strategist, I guess I'm a purist, right? I believe that strategy is something that's not a quick win. It's something that takes time, and it's something that moves your business from point A to B and helps you make decisions over a period of a few years and kind of puts you in the right position that's competitively sound. You have a competitive advantage, and you're selling more of what you need to sell. So Guinness is a project and a story that kind of started 4 or 5 years ago. And I'm sure you all know Guinness. Fans of Guinness in the room? Hands up, anyone? Yeah. I know it's not 11 o'clock yet. But Guinness is obviously kind of the crown jewels of advertising, right? So anything you do from a Guinness point of view, it has a lot of eyeballs on it, and you kind of need to deliver to quite a high kind of standard. And the brief came into our UK office from Guinness Ireland. And in Ireland, you think Guinness probably wouldn't have much of a problem selling their beer. But actually, the opposite was true. 5 years ago, the recession was in full force. Ireland was hit particularly hard. Visits to the pub were in decline. In fact, they're still in decline. Pubs are closing at a rate of knots. And this is partly because of, I guess, pressures on the economy, but it's equally because younger generations just don't do that kind of thing anymore. Like, we don't go to the pub every day after work. It's not where we meet and connect with our friends. We connect on social media. We connect through numerous different kind of means nowadays. So people are going to the pub less. And for Guinness, this was particularly troubling because if you think about what the Guinness experience is, it's a long pour that comes best kind of served from the tap, and it's something that you drink. You don't really binge drink and kind of take a lot of it all at once. So the pub side of it was proving challenging for Guinness and kind of driving sales and volumes. And the other side of it was, within the pubs themselves, one of their key competitors had brokered a deal where at the middle of the bar, they'd put their beer font. So when people walk into the bar, the first thing they see was their competitor, right? And there's a kind of a stat that's out there that people don't really think about what they're drinking until they kind of get to the bar, and usually what's in the front of the bar is kind of what they go to first. So that was also kind of hitting Guinness on the kind of the other side quite dramatically. So they were kind of suffering quite a lot. And we kind of came to the table and said, so what we're ultimately looking to do is to create a reason to go to the pub, to reward you for going to the pub, and when you go to the pub, to think to drink a Guinness. Easy, easy, easy task. So the solution in a nutshell was Guinness Plus. It was actually a mobile app. And I get the irony of calling it Plus after bashing Nike Plus, but it's a nice mechanic, so you steal those. But Guinness Plus was an app that we developed, and it was probably released about 2 years ago. And the basic premise of it was simple. From a consumer point of view, you check in when you go to a pub, you earn a point, or you get a free pint if you kind of have a reward kind of checked in. Or you get access to rewards. So basically the concept was that was a check-in is currency with Guinness, the Guinness brand. And it launched with, on the first download, you would get a free pint of Guinness. So there's quite a strong value proposition as to kind of why you would download it. From Guinness's point of view, it was sort of driven up through their CRM program. So they'd had a similar program that had given you free pints in the past, and it had been quite analog. You had to register, older generations registered, and you'd get a voucher through the post, and then you'd kind of have to go in, and they wouldn't necessarily know who you were there with or kind of any insight about what you were doing. And kind of that was the first big change for Guinness. We pulled them from a kind of an analog CRM program into a digital CRM program. But then kind of the other side of it was that we were creating a reason to think of Guinness when you go into a pub. And then assuming that you kind of did do that and you did connect and you did kind of participate with Guinness, we were also creating a wealth of digital data that they didn't have before about when people go to the pub, checking in the pub, checking in with friends in the pub. It was kind of a really good concept. And it started off with the kind of the simple proposition that you download it and you get a free pint, and then you get access to competitions, and et cetera, et cetera. And over the last kind of 2-3 years, Guinness have continued to kind of invest in this in Ireland. And it started out as kind of, yes, a mobile app, but actually what it's becoming now is something that connects all of their different marketing channels in a way that they've never been able to do before. So they do a lot of sports, it's highly associated with sports, they do a lot of sports sponsorships. So just weaving it naturally into kind of what Guinness talk about is kind of a really beautiful execution. So here's one, so starters orders, the first pint of the Grand National is on us, be one of the first to check in today and to claim one. So this was an example of a surprise reward. You wouldn't have known that this was coming until the day of the event, and then you would have had a surprise notification on your phone telling you this. You had socially kind of engaging activations where you would buy a Guinness and you'd get one free for your mate when you watched the Autumn Internationals with us this weekend. They started using it in out of home and kind of connecting it to kind of where the pub was. And then they got some chaps who play rugby to also help promote it. And this was from kind of last August. So from the 2 years that it's kind of been going on, it's been evolving and it's been gaining momentum, and it's sweeping up a lot of kind of their bigger kind of marketing activities and pulling it into one place from a consumer point of view. And I think when you look back to that map of what we actually did, you could look at it and you could say, okay, it was a mobile app, perhaps that was a mobile app strategy, but the reality of the delivery was something quite different. We started from a brand question point of view. We looked at kind of what they were having from a competitive point of view, from a consumer behavior point of view, and kind of looked at the full landscape of where their brand was really challenged. We had to activate their social teams, and we had to kind of think about how social media worked between friends. We had to activate commerce, vouchering system. Incredibly complicated to build your own mobile vouchering system. They did it incredibly well, hats off to them. And they had to re-envision their CRM system. The next step down comes down to mobile. That was kind of where we pulled mobile, the device in. It seemed like the most natural device to connect all of these things. And the store. So Guinness doesn't really own the store. They had to activate their on-trade partnerships, and they had to be able to distribute this at scale through Ireland. So if you imagine you put an app out there that has free Guinness from it in Ireland, it's probably going to spread like wildfire in the first few months, right? So it has to be accessible at scale, and it has to be delivered kind of with perfection that you would associate with Guinness. And lastly, we came down to kind of the mobile features. So it had messaging functions in it, it had location functions in it, and of course it was an app. And I'm pleased to say, it's not just theory, it's working. For the first time in 6 years, in an incredibly saturated market that they have a really long legacy, Guinness is starting to turn the tide. And this is very much drawn down to kind of their marketing executions and activities. And I think, for me, like, why it worked was really kind of what I kind of mentioned before in brief, that they were very frank about the challenges that their business was facing. They looked at the customer first, and they really understood what was going on in consumer behavior and kind of how the landscape was changing, and they chose not to ignore it. They could have done that quite easily. I know lots of brands that are guilty of doing that. And they sort of worried about the technology last. So they had a lot of infrastructure to kind of sort out and kind of make sure stuff was delivered. But thinking about the device and mobile was kind of probably the last thought. And then finally, probably why I think it really, really worked, was that it felt like Guinness. So an exchange where you get a free pint is awesome, but it's also quite transactional. It's not particularly emotional. And I think what's really beautiful about all of the executions that Guinness have done over the last few years with this app is that it's fundamentally tied into something that their brand owns, which is in the pub, having a great time with your mates, watching sport, and having a drink that's made of more.
If you can sell things by making women feel good about themselves rather than selling things by making women feel bad and thinking they need to buy your product to fix what's so wrong with them, I think that's really exciting, and I think more brands should be trying to play in that space.
What is this new audience we're trying to reach? Or is there a new automation system that we think is going to speed things along? Unless you kind of define what that innovation is, it's going to be very difficult for you to actually achieve what you're looking for.